Metric Environmental Inc. is Canada's premier water solution and environmental consulting company. Blue Metric provides a full range of environmental consulting services supported by bespoke engineering solutions for emergency, self-contained, and permanent water systems, and is always mission ready with a full range of in-house support to ensure your mission is a success.
And welcome back to the Over the Horizon podcast here at MASS 2023. I'm Alan Dale from Gale Force Winds. This conversation is proudly brought to you by Blue Metric. Scott, it's great to have you on the show as a co-host.
Thank you.
Thanks for hosting the show as Blue Metric. We certainly appreciate it. Simon, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about what you do.
Okay, Al, good to see you again.
You too,
Back
mate.
again. Good to see you again, Scott. So Simon Hughes for the viewers, Lockheed Martin Canada. I do business development in Navy and Maritime.
Simon, not your first MASS for sure. In fact, I believe you were on MASS last year. I asked you a question MASS last year that got a lot of kind of airplay, and that was, how should a CME best interact with Lockheed Martin? Simon, tell me about the show this year. How was it for you?
Yeah, so day one, very good, very interesting. Good panel discussions. There was a gentleman from CSIS who we were just talking about before you went on air here. Very interesting from a threat perspective with state actors, China and Russia, in most of the examples that he was talking about. And then the other discussion with Peter McKay and talking in general about Canadians' awareness of our security reality versus, what it is versus what we'd like it to be. And the fact that, and I've heard this before over the last several months in various fora, media, things on LinkedIn that I've read, that, we sort of we're getting a wake-up call here, and maybe we're being a little slow to wake up, and whether you define that as speed and procurement to deliver what you need, or just a general feeling in society that the defense of our security and our economy and these things that we used to think geography-wise we were protected from because we were across the oceans, there's no such thing as being protected by your geography anymore. Cyber is one example of that, right? And the fact that I think we all, as a society, as an individual, as a Canadian myself, we need to really change our attitude about what we think, how safe we think we are, and what we need to do, to be prudent in that domain, to protect ourselves, protect our economy, and democracy, and these things that came up in the discussion. These things are important, but they need to be protected. And you have to be active participant in that. You can't just assume that it's okay. And I took that away today, and I had read that, and seen that over the last 6 or 7 months as well. So it's an interesting theme that keeps repeating itself.
All right, and a fantastic perspective on the conversations in there. MASS tends to be smaller show, a little bit more intimate, a little bit more access to people. You travel around quite a few trade shows. You seem to be everywhere all the time. How does MASS compare to the rest of it from that perspective?
It's an intimate, smaller conference, but the subject matter, maritime and Arctic safety and security, is right now, if anybody's paying attention, is of probably utmost importance, right? And this has been part of the conversation today. So even though it's a small conference, there's a lot of value in it being kind of boutique, if you like, to use that term, right? There are good people here. The quality of the panelists is excellent. So these are some world-class folks who get up on the stage there and talk. Some industry people who got up and talk, who are running companies doing very interesting things, very relevant. It just because it's small doesn't mean it doesn't have value, right? And the topic itself, this is the only one in Canada that I would go to that talks about the Arctic and talks about the people in the Arctic. And the lead-off panel this morning, which made some very, very good points for industry players like me or any other company in Canada about learning how to start to engage and form those relationships to be able to even work with Indigenous peoples in these communities spread across the Arctic archipelago. And that's something that most of us in industry, and I would include ourselves, don't yet fully understand. We're working on it, and it's important, and we know we need to get there. And you know, it's a new domain, and that just this morning brought value to me, spending a couple of days here, and then the panels after that, the same sort of thing. So just because it's small doesn't mean it's not relevant. And the topic is, again, like I said, the topic is extremely relevant, and we're slow to get there, right? We're slow to get there. We've been talking about the Arctic, as Peter McKay said, for a long time, and we're still just kind of feeling our way. So, yeah, worthwhile coming every time. And from a B2B point of view, because I did the B2B session, every time I come here, I meet at least one company that I talk to for a few minutes that I circle back with and see great value in. You know, Newfoundland companies, you know, as well, local companies, but every time I come, there's at least one that I go, that's interesting, and I go back with that, and I talk to other people within Lockheed, our industrial development team, and we make these connections, and things start to happen.
That's fantastic. Here, Scott, your final thoughts on the day.
Well, I would, I totally agree with much of what Simon was saying, but I remember how hard I had to push to get the first Arctic deployment of ships into the Arctic from Halifax in 2000. We hadn't been in the Arctic as a Canadian Navy for decades, so we went up, and it is so good to see the focus now on the Arctic, all its importance, both economically, strategically, people-wise, that a conference like this is focusing very specifically on that. And I think it's not just the Arctic security aspect and all the geopolitical stuff that Simon's mentioned that was well discussed during the conference. It's also about our industrial capacity to be able to develop these technologies in Canada. And then when I was Director of Innovation at CanSoftCom, I saw that across this country, the talent, and Simon sees it, and you've seen it. We need to have better mechanisms to move that talent to another level, to keep those people and those young people and the men and women in Canada so that they don't go south. So I think a conference like this really identifies the need for security and relationships in the North, and as Simon said, dealing with Indigenous communities, dealing with Northern communities requires a total different perspective and skill set. It is not just throwing your card on the table and sending a brochure. It's all about relationships. Like us, I think we're all former naval officers, so you build those relationships, and I think Mass, and I agree with that synopsis again of Simon's. Size doesn't matter. It's the quality that matters, and those were some very interesting discussions. And now that Mass is moving into its second decade, I can only expect bigger things in the future. So we at BlueMetric thoroughly enjoyed working with you, like Gale Force Winds, you and Jerry, and we took a lot out of this. And though there's never not a good reason not to come back to St. John's for me. So,
and if Simon says.
Simon, Scott, always a pleasure to be in conversation with some ex-shipmates and friends from the Navy. I got to tell you, both of you have a great perspective on Canada, and I really appreciate your leadership, your thought leadership in this space. Thank you both.
Thank you very much, Alan.
BlueMetric wants to partner and work with Atlantic Canadian industries and organizations who are concerned about the water health of our planet and the people who inhabit it in an environmentally and culturally sensitive manner. BlueMetric wants to join the growing number of like-minded, innovative Atlantic Canadian companies who are changing the environmental landscape for the globe in a world-class way.